All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Danny Mando. Most of you know me, and it is great to see everyone here today. And I have the privilege of doing the introductory remarks, which I've been looking forward to doing since I asked Marc to do this back even before he was elected. So, as he was campaigning, and he looked like a shoo-in to become mayor, I asked Marc if he would like to be featured at a Brotherhood breakfast. His response, not unexpectedly, was, "Sure, I'd love to do it." And here we are this morning. So, as you may have read, Marc is a lifelong Newtonian, and along with a very successful career as an attorney, Marc has stayed involved in governance of this city on many levels. I always said to him, "You should be mayor one day." Yep, that happened. But more importantly, I've known Marc as a friend. I first remember meeting Marc at Camp Yavna at a pre-bar and bas mitzvah Temple Emmanuel weekend around 25 years ago. And we discussed our similar family background, and I remember how he and my wife Lynn and Roberta, his wife, bonded immediately. At Temple Emmanuel, Marc and Roberta are regulars. For as long as I can remember, I've counted on Marc to eagerly be a high holiday greeter. And of course, we all know that Roberta is the co-president of Sisterhood. But besides all that, what's most important to Marc, though, is his wonderful family. He has been married to his beloved Roberta for 41 years. His son Matthew was married. I wrote this down. His son Matthew was married, a couple of years ago, and his daughter Emma is finishing Michigan next year, and his other son Josh is getting married this October. I know for a fact that those four individuals are the focus of Marc's entire life. However, oh wait, there's one more little 1.5-year-old who I have on good resources is as cute as a button, and that's Marc and Roberta's first grandchild, Dahlia. So Marc, we are so proud of you that our city is in great shape. And the future is going to be wonderful here in Newton. And we love you as Mayor Marc Laredo. And now, for the show, we are also so blessed to have Marc being interviewed with our beloved Wes. Guys, take it away.
Thank you, Danny, and thank you, Brotherhood. And Marc, thank you for being here. So I want to jump in by talking about a theme that is very important to the synagogue, which is Lador Vador, from generation to generation. And I just want to start with your parents. Could you tell us about your parents, tell us about their lives, tell us about their story, tell us about their legacy, and tell us about how you are, who you are, and what you are because of your parents.
Sure. So, can everyone hear me? I have a team at City Hall that helps me with this stuff, so thank you, Wes.
If you're relying on me for tech, I...
Where's David Beckman? All right, David, you'll help us if needed. So I'm first generation American, like a bunch of folks here at the temple. My parents were from Europe. My dad grew up in Germany. He was the youngest of 3 kids. Part of the family had come from Germany for a number of generations. The other branch, the one that bore the Laredo name, actually was from Morocco. They had been in Morocco for generation after generation after generation until about the 1870s, when my great-grandfather came to Würzburg in Germany. My father grew up in a pretty prosperous household. His father ran a very successful store in Würzburg, and then, of course, the Nazis came to power. His older brothers left very early in the 1930s. His dad was briefly in a concentration camp, released, and my grandfather and grandmother actually left in about 1937. My dad didn't come till 1938, and my dad wasn't someone who talked a lot about that time, so I never quite understood how that came to be, but they moved to New York as many other Jewish German immigrants did, and they lived in Washington Heights, I believe, for many years. My mom was 10 years younger than my dad. She had been born in Prague with her father, who was a physician, an older half-brother who left in 1940, and unfortunately my grandparents and my mom did not leave. And so in 1943, my mom, at the age of 11 at the time, was sent along with her parents to Terezin concentration camp. She was extraordinarily, no one's ever lucky in those situations, but she was extraordinarily lucky that both she and her parents survived, although they lost cousins and grandparents and all sorts of other folks. They returned to Prague, and then in 1947, as things were not going so well there, the communists were coming to take over, they were able to emigrate. They came to the United States in 1948. My parents didn't meet till about 10 years later. They met in the late 1950s, got married very quickly. And about a year and a half later, they moved to the Boston area, and I was born. We moved to Newton, I think, in 1961 or 2. And my brother and sister and I all grew up in our relatively small house on Newtonville Avenue, on Bellevue Street, as you're going down towards Newtonville Avenue and the Turnpike, and that's where we lived all through school. You know, I've shared with someone like Danny and others the experience of being a first generation. My dad did not talk about his experiences very much. My mom did talk about them much more. Very interesting dynamic there. They were, as many were in that generation, very proud to be American. It was really important to assimilate. I think that was also true for lots of folks in the 1960s. And, you know, we grew up in our house on Bellevue Street. I can share more if you'd like, but go ahead.
Wow. So, Marc, it's, you know, William Faulkner said that the past is not dead. It's not even past. And when I hear your story, it's just so remarkable. Here you are, the mayor of Newton, and the Holocaust is just below the surface. Your mother, your father, both their stories. I'm curious, what was the impact of the Holocaust plus they come to America, they want to assimilate, on the Jewish life of your home, of the home of your origin, and how did how did your parents' Holocaust history shape your own Jewish life?
You know, my brother, sister, and I, who are all close, will joke that our parents had diagnosed, I don't want to say ailments, but issues related to being survivors. And when I say diagnosed, we diagnosed them as kids, of course. But back then, they didn't treat them. So I think there was a lot of underlying things that went on in the house. My mom, for example, if we had a cold, literally thought we were all going to die. And that, I think, is actually, when I've talked to other first-generation folks, very similar feelings that people have, this kind of excess feeling of fear. The flip side of that is an incredibly important stress on education. Education in this country was the absolute ticket to success. They had come from comfortable families in Europe, but they did not have that level of education here. My dad eventually got an architecture certificate from Cooper Union much later in his life, in his late 30s. My mom really didn't have that formal education, so in our house, I always joke the teacher was always right. That was kind of the mantra that they had. And we also not only were expected to do well in school, but we were expected to work hard. We all had jobs growing up as teenagers, in college. That was something, it was a given. Interestingly, Wes, my dad had grown up, I think, somewhat more religious, but not super involved. My mom had grown up in a pretty non-religious, assimilated household in Europe. When they came here, they actually belonged to something called the Ethical Cultural Society, which was, I'm seeing some folks nod, which was common for Jews who had emigrated. It was non-religious, but with a lot of Jewish values. And yet, by the time we were in third grade, they decided to join a temple. We belonged first for a brief period of time to Temple Sinai, and then we belonged to Temple Israel in Boston, where I got bar mitzvahed. We certainly observed Jewish holidays at home. We went to services on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. We had seders regularly with family friends every single year. But my parents were not, they were not super involved in Jewish community life like many of us are here are at Temple Emmanuel.
Wow. So, Marc, I'm curious about how your parents' experience of growing up in Adolf Hitler's Europe and both surviving, how has that, and they came to this great country, they came to this great city, etc., they raised you and your siblings. How did that experience shape your value system? Now roll the film forward, you're the mayor of Newton, and there's just a lot in this ecosystem. There's concerns about authoritarianism here in America. There's concerns about Israel and its viability and its future. There's just a lot of intensity in this ecosystem. How does their story of the 40s shape your life in the 20s?
You know, I think most of us, probably all of us, are shaped by what we learn in our homes. What I would say is, as I said earlier, a profound respect for education, critically important, tremendous respect for the freedoms that we have in this country. You know, my mom, when we were a little kid, if we didn't like something, she said, go ahead and stand out with a sign in front of this house which says, this house is unfair to children. And, you know, so if you think about that, here's the freedom of picketing, of standing outside with a sign, of expressing yourself freely in a country that you get to do that in. I know that going to vote, for example, and I've told this story before, I can remember being at the firehouse in Newton Corner, 6 or 7 years old. My mom was standing with a sign for some candidate. I have no idea who this candidate was, but the idea that you could stand with a sign in front of a polling place freely supporting your candidate, and then you walked into that voting booth, and you got to vote for whomever you wanted, and no one was looking over your shoulder. That's something that has stayed with me my entire life. And so I am extraordinarily strong believer in our Bill of Rights, in our Declaration of Rights here in Massachusetts, in the fundamental freedoms that we have in this country. That's something I've taken with me all my life. And I also frankly have a concern, and I'm always concerned about those in our society who are less fortunate, who often are below the radar. And that's true right here in Newton. Look, I tell folks, this is a pretty affluent community here, okay? But there are people at the Center Street Food Pantry or the Newton Food Pantry who are looking for food. There's people who go to Julie Plout Mahoney's Welcome Home who are looking for goods for their housing. And you know, we frankly struggled at times a little bit in my family. My dad had a pretty uneven work history. When I was a teenager, he got sick with leukemia, died when I was in college. And, you know, we lived in our house. There was food on the table, but it was not always easy. And my parents were from a generation where none of us talked about it. Something that I think from an adult point of view is probably extraordinarily unhealthy. But I say that because you asked what shapes my values, and that does shape my values quite significantly.
Marc, I want to thank you for that, Marc. Thank you. I want to ask you kind of two related questions. One, with you as a lifetime member of Temple Emmanuel, you and Roberta, and you raise your kids here. One is member of Temple Emmanuel question, and the other is as a mayor of Newton question, and they're kind of related questions. Here's my question for you. I'll give you both questions. You could tackle them in any order. We are obviously living in a polarized time. People have very strong feelings. There are words you can't even say because the words you say just evoke such intense emotions. So many feelings, et cetera, et cetera. First question, what should the role of Temple Emmanuel be in this divided, polarized world? Specifically, should it be a refuge and a sanctuary from the world, where like people, the world's out there, you come here and it's love and joy, it's Shabbat Alive at 18, it's singing, it's swaying, it's being inspired by song, by friendship, by tuna and bagels, by goodness. The world is the world out there. We come in here, it's a refuge, it's a sanctuary from the world. Or is our job to somehow inspire people to go out and change the world? Like what happens here inside these walls is to inspire people to change the world outside these walls. What do you believe as a member of the synagogue? And next question, what's the role of Newton? I mean, Newton's such a beautiful city, such a tranquil city. No place is perfect, but I always think that we live in the very best city, the best zip code, et cetera, in the world. Is our job to enjoy our own serenity, or is our job to go out and change the world? What do you think about that as mayor?
I actually think that they're not mutually exclusive, and we can and should do both. I think it's critically important that in any time, but at particularly difficult times, particularly, frankly, difficult times to be Jewish, let's all be really clear about that, it is extremely important that we have a place to gather. We have a place to gather with friends. We get to do things that are fun. We get to build community. And I'm going to do a shout out to my wife and Joanne, and I don't know if Lori's here, for like what the sisterhood does, because that is exactly the type of community that is so important to build. That is really important. At the same time, I would say both as mayor and a member of this community, we can't just stay within our walls. We have an obligation to be out in the community. We have an obligation to be involved. We have an obligation to reach out to those of other faiths and other beliefs and try to engage with them constructively. I think that's also critically important. I would worry a great deal, actually, if we as a community decided that we were just going to retreat to within. The times are so difficult here that we can't be engaged. I would argue that that's exactly the opposite. When times are difficult, whether it's locally, statewide, nationally, or internationally, that's the time we have to do both. We need to reinforce ourselves internally. We need to get that joy, that fun, that sense when I walk in here that I know everybody, or most of you. This is a big synagogue. But I feel warm. I feel welcome. I feel like I'm with friends. And yet at the same time, this community is so skilled, so talented, that it can make such a huge difference in the city of Newton and beyond, that I would hope we are continuing to do that. And I think we'll be I actually think we'll be a better synagogue if we are engaged externally.
Marc, speaking of engaged externally, and now to you as mayor, what are the biggest questions and the hardest questions that you're thinking about now as mayor of Newton? What are your hardest issues, your biggest issues, your most complex issues right now?
You know, when you talk to other mayors, and I've had a chance now to do that as part of some programs I've been involved in, the biggest fear I think you have as a mayor is that unknown disaster. Whether it's the unexpected hurricane, God forbid you have some kind of shooting, you have a police officer get harmed in the line of duty, you have a tragic fire, any of those unknowns, no matter how much you try to prepare for them, are really extraordinarily difficult to deal with, and that is the stuff that keeps you up at night. So far, we haven't had that during my tenure. I don't count 2 blizzards of 2 feet or each, that kind of a disaster. That's part of the natural ecosystem of a city.
Although, can I just pause
Please.
you on that? I did one piece of research for this interview.
Yeah.
And the one piece of research I did on this interview was interviewing John Lindsay in February of 1969 when he was the mayor of New York, and it was the snowstorm for which he was unprepared, et cetera, and it cost him politically. And then you get, your first day is January 1, and then bam, we get hit with these blizzards. Like, do you go to blizzard school? How do you know? How do you know what to do with a blizzard? And who trains you for how to handle a blizzard? How do you not become John Lindsay? How did you not become John Lindsay?
So here's a dirty little secret at City Hall. There's a lot of people who are a hell of a lot smarter than I am who've been through this all before. So when you get a storm coming up, for example, there's a snow emergency team that gets together. It's like 50 people. Everything from DPW to police to fire to IT to the library to Health and Human Services, and we're all in the room. They all know what their jobs are. I thought, gee, I'm the mayor. I'm going to get to do lots of things in a snowstorm. Not true. Basically, they tell me when I should declare an emergency. I listen. We do write the newsletters. The team writes the newsletters. I do proofread them before they go out. I am on some calls. I say thank you very much, and I make sure I shovel my sidewalk so it's pristine as soon as the snow's over, so I can set a good example.
Wow. That's so interesting. So now I noticed that you're very generous with emails, and I'm curious about what is your theory of email communication? Like they always say, like in the rabbinate too, and lots of fields, over-communicate. And you send these emails. What's your intent and purpose when you send out these community-wide emails?
So, it's interesting. When I was a city councilor, I did a monthly newsletter. Many of you are on it. And that was really a highlight of a few things I was doing that month. I tried to give you a little bit of my opinions on things. When we came into office, the team and I really thought long and hard about what our communications would be like. We wanted, and we changed it. And in fairness, every single mayor is going to communicate somewhat differently. But I'm a believer in being fairly succinct. Pictures are nice. People like to look at pictures. Give out information with links to places where, if you're really interested in a subject, you can get more information. And in events like snowstorms, I think we pumped out 5 or 6 emails in each of the snowstorms just to give people a quick update as to what was going on. I've gotten good and bad feedback on our snow removal efforts. There's always folks, and we can do better. I do think we succeeded well with the communications. On the email side, on a personal level, I try to respond to every single email within 24 hours. That's my rule. And I am setting a policy at City Hall that I expect people to respond to communications within 1 business day. Obviously, there's exceptions. Obviously, you can't solve everything. But, I think the communication is critical. And someone who sends you a fairly angry email, and I do get a few of those, and you respond promptly, and you respond and say, I'm sorry, we didn't do as well as we could have, we're going to do better. Boy, that just takes the tension out of it. And so I think it's just a matter of communicating as best you can and be willing to admit when you've screwed up.
So, Marc, I want to ask you what it feels like to be mayor of Newton. In the case of the blizzards, you shared that there's a whole room full of people who know what they're doing, and you have colleagues and collaborators. I'm wondering about, is it ever lonely being mayor? Like with the blizzard, it doesn't sound lonely. It sounds like you got a room of really smart people, and they know what they're doing. What are the times, if any, when it's lonely being mayor of Newton? What are the times, if any, when you actually have to make a decision and you don't have a room of 50 smart people to bounce ideas off of? Does that ever happen?
It has not happened yet, believe it or not. And part of that is I have built an exceptionally good inner team at City Hall. I like to say to everyone, we're all grown-ups because we really are. These are folks who have years and years of experience in government, in other areas of life. They know what they're doing, and so I am able to bounce off my fears, my anxieties with them. And we are trying, and we are always working to create a culture where we're honest with one another. And I think that's a risk that I am constantly going to have to fight as mayor, which is not to be approachable and willing to take constructive feedback, even if it's people telling you you're making a mistake. I think that's hard for most of us, and it's something I'm just continually working on. But I have not felt that loneliness yet, Wes. I expect I will.
Yeah.
There'll be something I do that's highly unpopular, and I will be the only person there.
But at to date, you have a team of partners that you bounce ideas off of, and you've got the wisdom of your colleagues.
Absolutely, and so I keep telling folks this is a team job. I mean, I'm the mayor. I'm the person out front. I'm the one who goes out and gives speeches and meets with the Cub Scouts and goes to the towers to give a talk. So all of those kinds of things are critically important. But the team approach and all the tough decisions is really so important.
So I have another question about what it's like to be mayor of Newton. Do you feel like you're mayor of Newton 24/7? Like if you're at home and you or Roberta realize, I got to get item X, Y, or Z at the grocery store, wherever you shop, can you just go out in sweats and a dirty T-shirt and run and get a carton of eggs because you're just Marc getting eggs that you need for the pantry? Or do you feel that you are mayor of all time, so you got to put on the snappy jacket and be mayor of all time? Like, are you mayor all the time? Can you ever wear jeans and sweats?
It's a great question. First of all, if you want to be anonymous, like go to Somerville or someplace like that. Guaranteed, no one's going to know who the hell you are. Look.
No, but if you go to Whole Foods, that's kiddish. I mean, if you go to Whole Foods, that's 100 people.
Roberta and I do have this discussion if we go grocery shopping together, which is sometimes she'll just go ahead of me and let me talk to whichever constituent wants to talk. What I would say is this, I think it's okay to go in jeans and a T-shirt to the grocery store. I actually think it's really nice for people to see you as just a regular person. I'm a regular person. I need to buy my groceries. I need to go to get bagels at Rosenfeld's on a Sunday morning. I need to get coffee somewhere. I mean, I think that's all fine. But yes, I am on. And I am well aware that even if you're driving around the city, you've got to be a little bit more polite. I now no longer intentionally jaywalk. I've realized that's probably a very bad idea. Because people do pick up on that, and that's fine. That's just part of the job.
And I'm also curious about how the people in Newton have received you so far. So if you and Roberta are out at a restaurant just having dinner, will people leave you alone? Or do people do what Larry David calls the stop and chat, or in this case, the stop, chat, and complain? Or do they just let you be?
It depends where you are. I think Roberta could relate being at O'Hara's a few weeks ago. She's shaking her head. That wasn't so good. I mean, we walked in there. There were several people who knew me. There was a firefighter there getting food for the firefighters. And, of course, I always talk to our firefighters and police officers whenever I meet them. That's actually really important to me. And people do want to come up. But once we sit down, people are fine. They leave you, And I like it. I'm not sure that same feeling is felt by everyone else in the family, but I enjoy it.
Marc, you were a lawyer for a long time, and you left your firm. You're retired as a lawyer. How does it feel going to work every day as the mayor versus going to work every day as a lawyer?
All right, so how many lawyers in the room? How many of you like billable hours? My guess is no one. No more billable hours at this job. So that's number one. That's great. Look, quite seriously, I tell people, Wes, that this is the best job I've ever had. I mean, it is the best job I've ever had. I like being a lawyer. Felt I was reasonably good at it. I helped build a law firm. Very proud of that. But this is so much more fun. and frankly, so much more impactful.
Could you talk about, I know that I've heard you talk about, I've read your remarks about the three big priorities, like the reason you became the mayor. Could you just talk about, here we are at a Brotherhood breakfast at Temple Emmanuel, could you talk about those three priorities and what Temple Emmanuel and other faith communities in Newton can do to be helpful in advancing those three priorities?
Sure. So the three priorities that we've been emphasizing are schools, which is pretty basic. That's where 2/3 of your tax dollars go. That's why a lot of folks move to Newton. That's number one. Number two is customer service. I'm just a huge believer that so many people actually do not interact with the city very often. They'll interact when there's a street light out, pothole needs to be filled, we didn't do a good job plowing the street. They need to get a special permit or a building permit to add on to their house. They may be paying a parking ticket. Those are the little interactions that folks have with the city, and I'm determined to make those actions as customer friendly as possible, because what I tell the folks who work in the city is, if the residents feel good about their interactions with the city and their interactions with you, then when it comes time to say we need more money to build a new ward school, for example, or a new police station, they're much more likely to vote for it because they've had a positive interaction with city government. So it's very basic, and I'm really trying to tie that in. And I'll be very interested in the feedback you can provide us about the customer service you get. But here's the thing that I think is critical for Temple Emmanuel, and the third piece, and that's building community. And I have been emphasizing that over and over again, and here's why. I've heard this from our clergy. I think many of us feel this. I am very worried about the sense of isolation that we get, not just here, but nationwide. Really concerned about how our kids spend way too much time on their screens. And the antidote for that is to get people involved in the community. It also makes a huge difference in reducing the tensions when we have difficult political decisions to make. And I give this example. People have very different views on development and how we should be building in the city. But if you've watched people on different sides of that issue play pickleball together in a gathering run by Parks and Recreation, and they've been on the pickleball court together, they're going to have a very different sense of how they're going to interact with one another when we're dealing with tough issues. And so that sense of community is critical. The sense of community within this building is vital. The sense of community when this community interacts with those of other faiths. And Wes was in my office a few weeks ago when we gathered maybe 25 different faith leaders in the city to get together to talk about issues. I want to do that again and again and again, because I think it is really important for breaking down the barriers in the city, for all of us accepting one another. And I'll just, again, this sounds so corny, so forgive me. But I think if you give back and help others, whether it's doing something within this Temple community or it's doing something within the city, I actually think we're happier people. I think we are happier people for giving back to others. And if we can do that in our community, we're going to be a far better place. And I truly believe that here in Newton, with all our talent, we can set an example, not just for the rest of the state, but for the rest of the country. And I'm going to keep working at that. It is not something that gets done overnight.
Marc, you referenced that meeting, which was such a fascinating and important meeting. One of the issues that clergy of all faiths offered was high anxiety about Minneapolis, high anxiety about ICE, high anxiety about people of color. By the way, we have people of color who are part of our Temple Emmanuel family. We have people of color who are employees of Temple Emmanuel. We have people of color who carry around their passport because they are actually afraid that ICE is going to come in and arrest them without justification. I know them. There are people like that at Temple Emmanuel. They are citizens of this country. They are here legally, they have all the documentation, and they actually carry the documentation on their person because they are scared that ICE is going to come in and haul them away. And I heard that from lots of clergy of lots of faiths. Could you just talk about your response to Minneapolis, to ICE, and how you think about that, and how Newton is preparing for that? Are people off when they fear that? Is that a legitimate and reasonable fear? What's your thinking about this moment?
So, that's probably the issue that I knew we were going to have immigration issues, but coming to the forefront within a few weeks of being elected, I did not anticipate. We do have a welcoming city ordinance in the city. It's been in place for about a decade. It makes it quite clear that our police officers are not to engage in cooperating with ICE for civil enforcement of the laws. Very different than arresting someone who's a violent criminal. I want to be very clear about that. We have a few things going on. Number one, I do have a bully pulpit as the mayor, and I have not hesitated to exercise that. I'm part of a municipal mayors association. Some of you may have seen a number of weeks ago that I stood with Mayor Wu, city manager of Cambridge, the mayor of Somerville, the mayor of Lynn, and we each spoke quite forcefully. And you can watch the tape, I was pretty unequivocal about my views, and that I think the tactics of ICE are not acceptable. And they're not acceptable because, to me, they go against my fundamental values, which I talked a moment ago about the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Rights and the freedoms that we enjoy from warrantless searches and the freedoms that we enjoy to be able to protest. And I am very concerned about that. So I have been working, and I'm continuing to work with the other mayors to stand up for that. Our law department is in constant communication with the Attorney General's office, with legal departments in other cities and towns to make sure that we're on the same page and not doing something that's inconsistent. We have made it very clear that if ICE agents do something that we feel is illegal, we're prepared to challenge that in court. We know how to do that. I know how to go to court. That's something I did for a long time, and I'm not afraid to do that. What I'm not going to do, and there's some folks who really want you to be out there, I'm not going to go instruct our police officers to go arrest ICE agents. I can't. And that's the line we draw, and I'll tell you why. I've got great police officers in Newton. I don't have them. We have great police officers in Newton. They're well-trained. They're responsive. They're part of our community. They understand their role is to be protectors. And, if you looked out yesterday morning, there's a police officer in a car on patrol. They're here on the high holidays walking through the synagogue to keep us safe. I cannot put those folks in harm's way with a group of ill-trained ICE agents who don't have that same training, who don't have that same ability of self-restraint, who wear masks, who don't wear badges. I can't put them in that kind of armed confrontation. So our officers are not going to be engaged in that. And that's a delicate balance that we have to work with. But I talk closely with our police chief, our chief city attorney, the city solicitor, our other inner team, and we are constantly looking at this, constantly monitoring it. And you're right, Wes, there are people right here in this community who are lawfully here, and they're afraid. And that's just plain out wrong.
So, Marc, I want to come back to my opening questions about your father and your mother and their growing up in a totalitarian regime. The head of ICE, Bovino, conspicuously dresses like a Nazi. I mean, and we've all seen this coverage. Wherever you are on the political spectrum, you've all seen this coverage about Bovino dresses the way Gestapo officers dressed in Hitler's Germany, and a lot of dog whistles that he's doing this on purpose. How do you, as the son of survivors, experience Bovino and what he represents?
As a son of Holocaust survivors, I'm acutely aware of what can go wrong even in the most democratic society. I mean, Germany in the 20s was a democratic society. Prague was, one of the shining examples of really a highly advanced city in the 1930s, and it can take a turn for very different ways. So, yes, Wes, it does shape my view. That's why I find it so abhorrent. It's not the America I know. We don't walk around, as I said earlier, we don't walk around with our police officers, wearing, hiding their faces, refusing to identify themselves. That's not the American way. And I just will stand against that as much as I can.
So, Mark, I have two last questions. The last one will be kind of a softball question. This penultimate one is not a softball question. It's kind of an elephant in the room question for a rabbi at this time. One of the constant questions, concerns, emails I get from our members, both as parents and also those who are teachers, is that the MTA hates on Israel, that the curriculum of public school is very, very anti-Israel, literally hates on Israel. It's drenched in Palestinian sympathy. It has an erasure about Israel's right, the indigenous nature of the Jewish connection to Israel, etc. I probably get a dozen of these reach-outs a year, and it's above my pay grade. I always send them to Rob Leica and to Jeremy Burton. It's above my pay grade. I marry and bury. I don't fight that fight. But I can just tell you it's a live concern. People who are professional teachers, who are Jewish, just say the MTA hates Israel, and a lot of that drips into the curriculum, or more than drips into the curriculum. What's your perspective on that? And by the way, Charles Jacobs was saying that 25 years ago, and people like me and legacy institutions thought he was a right-wing crank. I now think maybe he was right. So how do you see this issue?
Boy, that's not a softball question.
No, I said this was not my softball question. I have a softball question.
Look, I have no control over what the state or national teachers association does or they do. I don't think our city NTA is the same way. I think our city's teachers association has rejected those calls. We're never going to get it perfect in the public schools, okay? You're never going to get it perfect and make everyone feel like their point of view is properly addressed. So that's a constant challenge. I think as the mayor, as a member of the school committee, as someone who works closely with the superintendent, whom I like, by the way, a great deal. She's terrific. Our job is to be conscious of things that may seem or be anti-Semitic, that may be anti-Israel, to do our best to make sure that we are not perpetuating that kind of teaching in our schools. There is a fine line there, and it's not, as I said, it's not easy. But I can assure you that this mayor feels very, very strongly that any kind of anti-Semitism in our schools is unacceptable. Full stop.
Thank you, Mark. Here's the softball question.
I like this a lot better. Thank you.
As Danny mentioned, you are blessed, you and Roberta are blessed to be grandparents. You have a granddaughter who's local. And my question is, now that you're a grandfather and you see this beautiful little granddaughter who's what, like a year and a half?
She's a year and a half.
A year and a half. How do you feel about the world she is inheriting? And specifically, do you feel hopeful or not hopeful about the America that she's inheriting? And do you feel hopeful or not hopeful about the world that, will Israel be in that world? When your granddaughter is 50 or when your granddaughter is 40, is she going to be able to take your great-grandchildren on their bar and bat mitzvah tour to Israel? Will there be an Israel? Will it be strong and secure? How do you feel about the future world of your granddaughter?
Wes did give me some questions in advance, so in my morning run, I was kind of thinking about how I was going to answer some things at least. You know, as I've reached a certain age, or as I like to say on the campaign trail, vintage. That sounds a lot better than saying that you're old. A couple things I've realized. One, you're much happier for the most part in life. At least if life has gone reasonably well for you, and for Herbert and I think we've been exceptionally fortunate. I'm also more optimistic. I actually am more optimistic than I think sometimes our kids are, that we will get through difficult times, that the world will be a good place for our granddaughter and hopefully the additional grandchildren that someday will come along in their own time. But I am optimistic, and I am optimistic that we will get through difficult times here, that Israel will get through difficult times, that Israel will be a place where our grandchildren and great-grandchildren will be able to visit or live. And so I am optimistic, and I say that notwithstanding the fact that we live in a very difficult time. But I do think we have the right tools, the right skills to be able to get through that and come through successfully.
Well, from your mouth to God's ears. Mayor Laredo, thank you. And Danny, if you can solicit questions from our crowd.
Anyone have a question? Raise your hand.
Yeah. All three of my kids went to Schechter, but then they did go to Newton North. And I'm curious about something. I was kind of shocked when the Globe carried a story about a couple months ago about the 50 best high schools in the state. And neither Newton North nor Newton South was listed as one of them. And perhaps following up on Wes's question, I don't know the exact relationship between you as mayor and the school committee and stuff like that, but it has to be an item of concern, I think, unless the...
So the question was about the rankings of our high schools and why they weren't in our top 50. You know, I have to say, whenever those rankings make you look really good, they are so scientifically done and they're brilliant. And whenever they're not so good, there's a flaw with them. I'd say the truth is somewhere in between. You really have to be careful with those kinds of rankings as to what factors they're looking at. I'll give you a good example. Newton North and Newton South have rigorous tech voc programs, okay? Really good. I think that's one of the best things about our high schools. But those may be kids who may not necessarily be going on to a four-year college, but are going on to a trade. We're educating them. I think it's fabulous that we do that. But you may be having folks who are not, those kids may not be taking an AP course, for example. Those kind of factors can really change you a lot. I will note that I think it was Boston Magazine rated us just behind Brookline as being the best place to live. That's really good. Newton is traditionally viewed as an exceptionally desirable place to live. Look, I think that we are at work improving our schools. I think our superintendent's really applying a level of data-driven decision-making and updating our curriculum in a way that wasn't done for probably 15 or 20 years. That's going to take us a couple of years to do. And part of that also is continuing to build new school facilities so our kids have the best school buildings to go to school in. I actually know, I have 3 graduates in Newton Public Schools. I think they were all exceptionally well educated, number one. Number two, I think they were exceptionally well prepared for life. And in many ways, that preparation for life, which includes education, is even more important.
Marc, you described quite beautifully how the city deals with a challenge like a snowstorm. There's a group of 50 people that get together and tackle the problem. We're confronted with other challenges like attacks on houses of worship, most recently this past week that ended, fortunately, with no children injured. Can you describe what infrastructure there is in the city that connects with outside law enforcement and intelligence that serves to protect us?
Yeah, I want to be a little bit careful here about not talking too much about kind of some of the inner police workings. You got to be just a little thoughtful there. But I can assure you that our police department is not only exceptionally well trained, but is closely linked with the district attorney's office, with the attorney general's office, with the FBI if needed, with the other law enforcement agencies in the region. We are part of metropolitan area planning for SWAT teams, for example, should we have that kind of situation. Our officers go, and that includes not just police, but also fire and EMTs, go through constant training. I just sat this week with leaders from all across the city at our emergency command center at the fire station in the center. If you ever have a chance to tour it, really fascinating to see the room where you're literally sitting in if there's an emergency. It's our emergency command center with a very clear protocol of who's in charge. Is it police in charge or is it fire in charge? Depends on the emergency. It's actually, believe it or not the mayor. The mayor makes a lot of the political decisions, is a front-facing person, but when it comes to tactics and operations, police and fire take charge, and it will depend on the incident as to the level of seniority. We're also doing in the next few weeks tabletop exercises. You know, you put a situation out there, one kind of disaster or another, you don't know what it's going to be in advance, and then you have to figure out what you're going to do there. I sat, for example, in the wake of the marathon bombing a number of years ago. Our Marathon Day events are extraordinarily well coordinated. Police, fire, DPW. I mean, we have 7 miles of the marathon that goes through Newton, and I can assure you they are extraordinarily well trained to deal with that kind of emergency. So I feel very good about our emergency preparedness. I'll add that we have a terrific fire chief in Greg Gentile, and a brand new police chief in Tim Cahoon, who came to us here from being the chief of Braintree, where not only was he exceptionally well liked, but seen as a progressive chief, kind of a rare combination. And I think he's going to be, I'm really thrilled to have him on the board. And I'm going to ask, part of what we're going to do is try to get him to come out to meet with folks too. I think that will be very important.
Hi, over here. So I'm Barbara Gutman. I actually was at Camp Yavna too 25 years ago
remember
doing
that.
pre-bat mitzvah, so this is funny. Anyway, my question is a little bit of a pivot. It's more on housing affordability and just in terms of, I don't know what your plans are, how you're thinking about housing affordability. I know that there's several ballot questions coming up statewide in terms of potential rent control, things like that. And I don't know, I was just curious to hear where you are in terms of Newton and what you see for Newton.
So, look, a great question about housing affordability. Extraordinarily difficult issue to deal with, and we're not, frankly, going to deal with it by ourselves. I think I always remind people, you start off with looking at geography. Look at Boston and look to the east. What's to the east of Boston? Water. You can't build there. So unlike some other cities, the only place you can go are north, west, and south. That's number one. Number two, I think we're really plagued in this area in particular with a lack of good commuter rail to get us to the middle and western parts of the state. If we want to really do something about housing, that's actually a very good way to do that. Those are communities that really could use some more economic development and would benefit tremendously by rail service. Third thing, I sound negative, but I want to remind people we are highly unlikely to be building more single-family homes in the city. Why? We don't have any vacant land. We may have some here or there, but we don't have the land like you might have had in Oak Hill Park and right after World War II, when you could literally build a planned community complete with shopping center, school, dry cleaner, plumber. I mean, that was the ideal planned community, and we just can't do that anymore. So what are we going to do? We are far more likely, and we've approved major developments at Riverside, Dunstan East, Northland, all of which will provide a lot of rental housing. We have a new zoning act which went into effect as part of the MBTA Communities Act, which is going to allow for more by right development. I just had somebody in my office this week talking about not one but 2 projects they want to build in the city, so we are going to see that. Are we going to make housing prices, quote, affordable in this city? Frankly, I think that's going to be hard. We are going to have more housing, I think that's true, and as part of that, you get some of that affordable, but we're also dealing with issues that relate to finance. You know, whenever I talk to people about downsizing, for example, they're all for it, but they then tend to be for it for someone else. They like living in their homes, and there's nothing wrong with that. I joke with Roberta, we're not going anywhere for a really long time. And that's true, so that we have this dynamic where people like to live in their homes, where it's difficult with the way interest rates are working. One solution that I think is really transformative is what 2 Life has done on the JCC campus, which is building that kind of middle market type of housing or in a senior living facility. How many of you have been there, by the way? It's amazing, isn't it? I came back after going there, and I did say to Roberto, I could see someday moving out because I thought it was so nice. But that also is a vehicle to building more affordability in the city, because if you provide people with an attractive alternative for them, then they might sell their home, which in turn opens it up to another family. So there's a whole bunch of factors that go into that. Thank you.
We're going to have one more question, and then we can, Mark.
I'll stick around. I'm not going anywhere.
Hi, Mark. Question as a Newton Public Schools parent, and I appreciate your expertise. And my question is twofold. One, I actually might argue that the NPS that our kids are in now has degraded significantly since your kids were there, kind of as a result of our previous superintendent, Dr. Fleischman, and even current Newton North principal, Henry Turner, degrading the schools by taking away any leveling and rigor. I know that you have supported adding back levels. I would ask, what is the timeline for that? I think as long as we have, as long as we don't have levels, it's impossible to get where we want to go. I also agree with you that Dr. Nolan is brilliant. The schools have been chronically underfunded. What can we do to get to the Thrive budget that the superintendent says we need to be at in order to be a top school?
So let me try to deal with the money question first, and then I'll go back to the leveling. Look, there's never enough money for what you want to do in government, particularly the public schools, and I always tell folks there's no money tree at City Hall. With that said, we are providing a very significant funding increase for the schools next year. There was an adjusted base from last year, went up about 1%. On top of that, we are increasing the school allocation this year by 5.75%. So that's a very large increase, really much more than the rate of inflation. I think we have made it quite clear to the schools that we are there to support them. I will say this, at the same time, I think schools always need to be thinking like we think in the rest of city government. You have choices to make. You have a finite amount of money. Where is the best use of that money? And just because you've been doing something for 5, 10, 15 years doesn't mean you should continue to do it. You may now want to redeploy resources elsewhere. So that's an ongoing conversation that we are having and the schools are having. And I sit as one of the 9 voting members of the school committee. In terms of leveling, I won't go into the details, but there was some movement to get rid of kind of the advanced, intermediate, lower level kind of tracking system that's been very common in our high schools for generations. We even used to have that in elementary schools back when I was a kid. There was a movement to go away from that entirely. I don't think this school committee or this superintendent support that. There is going to be a reintroduction, particularly in math, about some different leveling, with the idea that you don't want to lock kids in forever if they are, if they start to achieve more, you want kids to be able to move up, to be more challenged. But I personally believe that, especially in certain courses, especially in high school, it's actually a disservice to every single kid in the classroom and the teacher to expect them to teach to a very broad range of both abilities and interest. And so I think that's a difficult challenge for school systems, but one we're working on, and I'm confident that we'll strike the right balance.
Marc, we just want to thank you, and we want to say our city is in great hands. Thank you for being our mayor, and thank you for being here this morning.
All right, thank you everyone for coming.